The battlefield is silent, save for the moans of the dying and the crackle of burning banners. The war is over. We have won. I sit astride my warhorse, looking down at the last survivor of our enemies. General Riven Hale. He's on his knees, wrists bound, chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Blood mats his dark hair, streaking his sharp cheekbones. Even in chains, he's defiant. His piercing silver eyes locked onto mine with something between hatred and pride. "You should have killed me," he says, voice hoarse but steady. I smirk. "No, General. Death is too merciful. I have other plans for you." The soldiers cheer as I turn my horse, ordering Riven to be brought back to my kingdom in chains. He will serve me, not as a prisoner, but as mine. The journey back is long, and Riven barely speaks. But I catch his glances, the way his body tenses when our eyes meet. When we arrive at the palace, I strip him of his general's armor and throw him into my chambers. He is no ordinary prisoner. He is to be my personal attendant. "You expect me to serve you?" he growls, his voice edged with disbelief and fury. "Yes," I say simply. "And you will." For weeks, he resists. He refuses to speak unless necessary, glares whenever he sets out my armor or brings me wine. But I notice the way his hands tremble when he dresses me, the way his breath hitches when I stand too close. He is my enemy. But in the candlelight, when I catch his gaze lingering on me for too long, something burns between us that neither of us dares to name. One night, after a heated political meeting, I return to my chambers and find Riven staring out at the moonlit balcony. His arms are crossed, his posture stiff. "You're not a servant," I murmur, approaching him. "You're still a general, even in chains." He exhales sharply. "I was a general. Now I'm just your pet." There's bitterness in his voice, but also something else. Resentment? Desire? I step closer, almost daring him to turn and face me. When he does, our faces are inches apart. The air is thick with tension. His lips part, as if to say something, but instead, he clenches his fists and steps away. That night, I lie awake, restless. Days turned into weeks. I kept him close, not just as a prisoner, but as my personal attendant. I forced him to stand behind me in court, to kneel beside me at feasts. I relished the fury in his eyes, the rigid way he held himself every time I touched him. Days pass, and the tension becomes unbearable. Every stolen glance, every unspoken word coils tighter until it's ready to snap. Then, it happens. I return late from a council meeting, rain clinging to my clothes. Riven is waiting in my chambers, but this time, he does not look away. "You enjoy breaking people," he says, voice low. "Do you enjoy this?" His fingers brush against my collar, a challenge. I grab his wrist before he can pull away. "You think I don't suffer too?" My voice is rough, raw. "That I don't feel this?" Our faces were inches apart, the air between us thick and suffocating. For a moment, we are motionless. Then, he surges forward. Our lips crash together, desperate, furious. He tastes of war and fire, his body tense against mine. When we part, both of us are breathing hard. A battle, just like the one we had fought on the field. Only this time, there were no swords, only hands grasping, mouths clashing, bodies colliding. We stumbled back into the darkness of my chambers, hands tangled in each other's clothes. He bit my lip, drawing blood, and I gripped his waist, shoving him against the wall. "You hate me," I murmured against his skin, pressing open-mouthed kisses along his throat. He let out a breathless laugh, sharp and bitter. I hate myself more for wanting this. I pushed him onto the bed, hovering over him. For the first time, he didn't fight me. He just stared up at me, his silver eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. I traced my fingers down his chest, across the scars left by war. His breath hitched, his body tensing beneath mine. I had seen him fight, had seen him bleed. but I had never seen him like this. Vulnerable. Exposed. "Tell me to stop," I whispered. He didn't. Instead, he reached up, fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me down into another kiss. This one slower, deeper, filled with something neither of us wanted to name. The room faded around us. There was no war, no past, no kingdom. Only heat, only touch, only the quiet, shuddering breaths we took between whispered curses and stolen moans. I memorized the way he trembled beneath me, the way his hands clutched at my back as though he hated himself for needing me this much. I was supposed to break him. Instead, he was breaking me. As we fell into each other, I knew this was not just lust, not just desire. This was our greatest sin, and I would never be free of it. What started as anger turns into something deeper, something neither of us can control. Riven is still my captive, but in the darkness, in the quiet of our stolen nights, he is my equal. But outside these walls, we are still enemies. If anyone finds out, everything will crumble. "Do you regret it?" I ask him one evening, tracing the scars on his back. He exhales, his fingers tightening against my skin. Number, and that terrifies me. The court begins to suspect. Whispers spread of my growing attachment to the captive general. And then, the betrayal. A spy in the palace exposes us. Riven is dragged from my chambers, accused of seducing me to overthrow my rule. I fight for him. I rage. I command. But my own council turns against me. "You are the prince," they remind me. "Would you risk your throne for him?" When I see him again, he is bound in chains once more, awaiting execution. I kneel before him, my hands cupping his face. "I will fix this," I vow. But he smiles, a soft, aching thing. "You were never meant to be a king who bows for anyone, Adrian." That night, I betray my own kingdom for him. I cut him free, steal a horse, and together we ride into the night. The entire kingdom will hunt us, but I do not care. As dawn rises, he turns to me. "What now?" I reach for him, pressing a lingering kiss to his lips. Now, we live. And with that, we disappear into the horizon. Together, we left the kingdom under the cover of darkness. No royal carriages, no banners, no gold-lined cloaks, just two men on horseback riding far from the weight of crowns and thrones. I felt the cold wind bite at my skin, but for the first time, I welcomed it. It was real. It was free. Riven rode beside me, his body still weak from the wound he had taken. But when he looked at me, his silver eyes held something I had never seen before. Peace. We rode until the kingdom disappeared behind us, until the land stretched wide and endless, until there was nothing but the road and the promise of something new. When we reached the hills overlooking a quiet valley, I slowed my horse. Riven did the same, glancing at me with amusement. "You're staring," he murmured. I smirked. "I've earned the right to." He scoffed, but there was no bite to it, just warmth, just something softer than war and bloodshed. "Where now, Your Majesty?" he teased. I exhaled, rolling my shoulders, finally free of the title that had once chained me. "Wherever we want." And for the first time in my life, I meant it. We settled in a distant town, one untouched by war. It was small, nestled against the forest, where the mornings smelled of fresh bread and pine, where no one knew our names. Riven found work at the blacksmith's forge, his hands calloused from war now shaping something new, something that did not destroy, but created. I watched him from the window of our small home, his shirt unbuttoned from the heat of the fire, his skin glistening with sweat. "You could help, you know," he called out without turning. I smirked, leaning against the doorframe. "I enjoy the view too much." He turned, rolling his eyes, but the corner of his lips lifted in a small smile. At night, we lay tangled together, no longer bound by duty, by war, by fear. I traced the scars on his back, pressed kisses against the ones on his chest. You never asked me why I stayed, he murmured one evening, his breath warm against my ear. I ran my fingers through his hair, pulling him closer. Because you love me, he chuckled, deep and rich. Confident, aren't you? I pulled him on top of me, feeling his weight, his warmth, the steady thrum of his heart. Say it. His silver eyes met mine, something fierce and unyielding in them. I love you, he whispered, and I will never leave you again. I pulled him down into a kiss, slow and deep, tasting forever on his lips. The days passed in golden sunlight, the nights in whispered promises. We traveled when we wanted. We built a home where we chose. We kissed in the rain, made love by firelight, argued over ridiculous things, only to end up breathless against the walls of our home. There were no kings here, no war, only us. One evening, as we lay beneath the stars, Riven took my hand, threading his fingers through mine. Do you miss it? He asked. The crown? I shook my head, pressing a kiss to his knuckles. Not for a second. His lips curved, and he turned to me fully, his body flush against mine. Then we did the impossible, he murmured. I raised a brow. And that is? His voice was quiet, filled with something softer than I had ever known. We survived. I smiled, brushing my lips over his, tasting a future that belonged to no one but us. Yes, I whispered against his mouth. We did. And for the first time in both our lives, happiness was no longer a dream. It was real. It was ours. And it would last forever.